So my name's Harpreet Kelsey Smith, and I'm one of the directors at Compassionate Communities Australia. Before we kick off today, I just wanted to acknowledge um, the traditional custodians of the lands that we all meet upon today, elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that I'm coming from the beautiful lands of the Yugambeh people on the Gold Coast, and acknowledge all of the elders from the lands that you are all coming on today as well. So I'm um, so pleased to invite and welcome Aunty Rhonda Radley and Genus Passi, who are joining us today to share their experiences and their stories when it comes to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's perspectives of going through sorry business, death, dying, grieving, and rituals. And I want to pay particular respect and acknowledgement to Aunty Rhonda, who's currently going through sorry business right now, and thank her for joining us while all of that is still occurring. So, a little bit about Dr. Aunty Rhonda Radley. I'm like, I always get it wrong. Is it Aunty Rhonda, Doctor? There's too many titles. Um, whose Aboriginal name is Anjakari. Did I pronounce that right, Aunty Rhonda?
Yes.
And she is a proud Bay Dungari saltwater freshwater woman from the mid-north coast of New South Wales who walks with her ancestors. She's known as Barn, Aunty Rhonda, and she's an active Aboriginal community elder supporting the revival of culture through language and practices in her local community. Aunty Rhonda advocates for her Aboriginal languages to be learned, spoken, and seen in educational systems and community spaces. She weaves Gathang language through her art forms to invite the viewers to use a cultural lens to connect with Aboriginal stories and practices. Her gift to families and individuals is to be present in heart and mind and to be open to all possibilities that manifest in times of grief and healing. And I'm also very happy to welcome Genus Passi, who's of Eastern Torres Strait Islander heritage with family lineage from Lafau and Western Papuan province. As a cultural educator, Genus has collaborated with local, state, and Commonwealth agencies, NGOs, and community organisation, bringing a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. He is a proactive community connector and has worked across various health systems, focusing on closing the gap initiatives, improving education outcomes, addressing juvenile justice systems, and advocating for better housing solutions. He's very passionate about driving positive change and is dedicated to addressing social issues that impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and First Nations people across Queensland, New South Wales, and ACT. Genus has served in leadership positions, being in the current board of Yamba Housing in Townsville and previously the chair of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Community Advisory Council with the Hospital and Health Service and managing director and founder of Namu Consultancy. So welcome, Aunty Rhonda and Genus. I'm I'm so thrilled that you're both here today, and thank you for giving up your time, especially following NAIDOC week and all that's happening in both of your lives. So I wanted to start off by asking you a question around cultural identity, I guess. Both of you carry deep cultural knowledge and community leadership. How does your culture identify and shape the way you support others through grief, loss, and end-of-life experiences? So, Aunty Rhonda, did you want
Um,
to kick off or
yeah,
Guinness?
I'm happy. No, I'm happy for Aunty Rhonda to kick off if that's okay.
Okay. I suppose you can't sort of respond to that question without telling a little bit of story about who I am in regards to my identity. Baraba Yitir cis Nata Birupai Dankari woman. I introduced myself as cis because it was part of my identity growing up because all my family called me cis. and I'm a Biripi Dungari woman, Biripi down my grandfather's bloodline, and Dungari through my grandmother's bloodline. That is part of my identity, but it's not who all I am. I'm a grandmother, a mother, auntie, a daughter, and niece. My kin is Gula, which is the koala for my grandfather, and Wambun, which is kangaroo through my grandmother. So that's also part of my identity. So it's a huge sort of, I suppose, ways that we could talk to identity, and there's just layers and layers to that, but I'll just stop there. But when we talk about, sad news and sorry business, for us, it's about community. It's about how we interact with each other. And when I was growing up, when we left our community, went to other communities, and business around other members that didn't live with us. It was not a night stay, it was a week. So there was a lot of sitting and talking, but that was part of getting to know the other parts of our family, our extended family, and the new members, and meet up with the older family members. And I remember that. So clearly, when I was growing up, I didn't always have a contact with my grandmother's country, Dungari, but I remember going there a fair bit when I was young because of the sorry business. So it was sort of, and I think Christianity crept in there, so there was a lot of contact with Christian elements of that coming together, even in the service, and the way that some of our older people had spoken to us. So when we're talking about identity and how that influences my experience of sorry business, and those times where we know some of our old people are passing away, is huge. It's sort of layers and layers of that. But talking about now, and I think you can't sort of talk to the past, about now without talking a little bit of the past, because that sort of influence where we are here now. So over my lifetime, I've seen ceremonies done in a number of different ways, and in different communities, remote communities around, what we call here in New South Wales sorry business. It's that time when, we all come together to honour that person, pay respect to that person that's passed. It's been, for me, in some ways, shifted with the next generation, because I don't think they have the solid anchoring, and not to say that I have, but with, what that family time means. It's because we've got so much, to do these days. Everyone's so busy, and so when we're talking about sorry business, sometimes it's just turning up at a funeral, and we sort of meet and greet, and either we sort of meet new family members, or connect with our existing family members. It's too short when we're talking about that capacity of us to heal through grief. You've got to give that time, and I'm feeling that our generation, next generation, are going to be missing out on what that really means in its entirety, especially when we connect to our identity, because this is a big time for us to really show respect and really connect with, especially our old people, because we haven't got them for very long, and to meet our new family members, just to circle back to that, because that's really important for us to know where we fit within our family, not just in words and just mapping it out for them, which does happen, but in real time, real people. And I think that's, really precious, and we need to hold on to that. And I think that's part of my responsibility now as one of those older people, to ensure that, our younger generation understand that yes, we get busy, but then, being, when we talk about identity, being an Aboriginal person, Birupai Dangari, I also have obligations. And what's coming through me, to me very strongly, is that we've got the importance of doing ceremony. And what does that look like? I think, it looks different for different people and in different communities. But I think, that we need to get back to more of that ceremony rather than allow our generations to move away from it, because it really does serve us if you're talking about in an Aboriginal way or Birupai Dangari way. I don't know if that answered the question, but
It really did, Aunty Rhonda. Thank you. Thank you. Genus, are you happy to share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah,
And
sure. Thank you, Aunty Rhonda. That was great. Where do I start? So, in the Torres Strait Island culture, we talk about identity is the root or the foundation of how we function, especially in these customary practices, or and it's, as Aunty Rhonda mentioned, for us in our Torres Strait Island space, it's layers upon layers. So just as an example, um, prior to someone in our family passing away, oftentimes significant family members will get a sign. So because as we are of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander heritage, we're very spiritual. So oftentimes in the Torres Strait Island culture, significant family member will get a sign of the upcoming passing of that family member. And that could be, in my wife's case, who's been blessed with some of these protocols, she will often see a straight line of a cloud in the sky. And my wife will look at me and say, expect some bad news coming up. And sure enough, within a day or two, I will get a phone call that a family member has passed away. So that's just one example, but there are many examples of the signs that I talk to. In my mum's case, from a personal perspective, and it happens a lot of times with our elders. So our Torres Strait Island elders, oftentimes when it's close to their passing, they will mimic their totem. So in my grandmother's case, my wife was lucky enough to look after her for the last 3 months of her fighting her battle with cancer. She mimicked a dolphin. So she would look up in the air 3 times and blow wind, and she died in my wife's arms. So she was mimicking her totem. In my mum's case, the same thing. She did the same action, mimicking her totem, and it was her time to go. So culturally, my cultural obligation when my mum was in hospital, from a personal point of view, was the moment my mum started to mimic these totems in our culture, my cultural obligation was to take my mum home. That was her telling me she had to be home because her time was coming. Unfortunately, with my mum, we missed that time. By the time the hospital had organised for her to be released and home, she passed away a couple of hours before we were able to do that. So that's in the lead up to someone passing. As I mentioned, when we talk about our identity, These are the things. But then there's a whole lot of other layers of practices that happen. Sadly, with the introduction of all of these different social media platforms, our Torres Strait Island community has lost their way a little bit in terms of um, how do we go about communicating someone's passing. So the actual traditional cultural practice and protocol is when a family member passes away, we will often congregate at that family member's house, and then people will let other people know in the community come there. And as family members come there, they will have an inkling what it's about. But as they come there and as a family group, it's normally the in-law. So, and the in-law is identified through marriage, through the church. So the in-law's responsibility then is to, once they've sat the immediate family down, it is their cultural responsibility then to break the news to the family that we have lost a family member. And for however long, we call it in our language a bud. So however long the family is needed to sit there for when all the arrangements are done, other family members travel into the city, we will sit at that bud. And the in-law's responsibility, like I will use my wife, my own personal experience with my wife, it was her responsibility to feed the family for however long that took, whether it was a week, whether it was 2 weeks. It was our responsibility to feed family of an evening, of a lunchtime, as they came there to sit with the family to comfort them through that sorry business, through that mourning period. So once the funeral comes around, again, the in-laws will act upon the request of the family to arrange the funeral, and it is their job to implement those things because we are, as a family, we are in mourning. Now, to speed up the process a little bit, once that funeral part is done in the sorry business and we bury our loved one, within 12 months or 2 years, the immediate family, say for me example, in a year or two, when it's time to put a foundation and a headstone on the grave, we will do that and we will smother that foundation and that headstone with gifts and materials and money and all sorts of things. And then we will build a framework around it. It is our way then to thank our in-laws for looking after us during the mourning period. They will unveil that headstone. Everything that's on that headstone and inside that framework belongs to them. So that's a cultural protocol and practice that we still use today. As I mentioned, the sad part of it all is that because of social media today, the moment a family member passes away, guess who's on Facebook? Guess who's on social media? And it's just people, yeah, they've lost that I think Aunty Rhonda covered it there, that cultural connectedness. This is a cultural practice that happens in the Torres Strait cultural space far back as I can remember. And unfortunately, our social media platforms that are so accessible today is just it's used in the wrong way when it comes to cultural practice. That's just me on my little
Thank you,
soapbox.
Genus.
Yeah, but
And I
it's
think,
certainly
yeah, what you and Aunty Rhonda have talked about, I mean, and talking about the way that things were done and the reasons why it's done when you sit down in person. And, when we talk about compassionate communities, it's around, yeah, you can write some words on social media, but it's not the same as sitting together and being able to process, um, and the care that comes with that. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Aunty Rhonda, you speak often about, the presence of heart and mind during times of grief. And I guess even when we just listened to you, Genus, and you talked about, well, the presence of social media and how instant things are done, what does that presence look like in practice for you and in your experience, Aunty Rhonda, and how can others cultivate it in their own communities and families?
Um, think it's a loaded question, meaning, again, there's just so many
Layers.
layers to it. But I just want to, again, just tell a little bit of story about my family. Here in the mid-north coast, New South Wales, Biripai Dungari country, a lot of our mob got moved off country and placed in reserves. And my family is part of that movement. So both my grandfather and grandmother grew up and periods of time on reserves, either with their own family or when they came together. They lived at Burnt Bridge in Kempsey. And so there was a lot of Christian influences around, when our mob passed. And of course, our mob couldn't go back on country and do any of those ceremonies. So a lot of ceremonies had stopped that period of time, even our language, in the fact that, our old people had to speak the language, but secretly. And I believe, that's why I'm such a supporter of the revitalisation of language, because it's one way that we can actually bring strong ceremony back into some of these spaces. So with my family story is that a lot of my aunties, great aunties and uncles, great uncles were institutionalised. My grandmother went out to servantry, and she has big stories around that experience. So when I'm talking about, being able to be present at a time where there's a lot of grief, I think over my lifetime, when we talk about generational trauma that being handed down, I've experienced deep grief. And I think that those experiences allow me maybe to see or maybe feel things a little bit deeper. And I just want to start up front. I love people, I really, but it's always been a little bit tricky for me to sit with people because I had so much of my own grief. So I recognised that I had to do a lot of healing. And, I lost a baby when I was a young woman, didn't do anything about that, carried a lot of trauma around that. So later in life, when I felt, and this is not always the case, that a lot of my family members hadn't been honoured at that time because people didn't really know how to react. What do I do? And I experienced that when I lost my little one. There's family members that just didn't know how to support me. And I really didn't have the voice to be able to give them any guidance because I had so much trauma and so much of my own healing to do. So half part of my life is actually, coming to the point of recognising that and then doing something about it. And that's probably a whole nother story. So I think when we talk about being present with people, sometimes there's no words. There's just you bring your spirit into that. And if you've got a loving, open spirit, other people will feel that. And sometimes that's all they need, is that showing up and just be present with them and allow them to guide what they need next. And, our mob are really good at reading body language and stuff like that. So it's been totally there with them. And it could look like anything. And I have many experiences where, we've used laughter, blackfellas using humour all the time, and that's healing. And I think, we have some really beautiful moments. And I'm I'm just going to share something really private and deep because I'm going through something at the moment. We lost a family member. She was in her early 20s with a baby. They just had a car accident, hit a tree, and I just do apologise if this triggers anything for other people. And she was a beautiful, amazing young woman. And the sad part of it is, you know, we lost her daughter at the same time, hit a tree instantly. But when I went up and seen her mum, and there was no words, there's no words for that depth of grief for her mother because she lost her daughter. But because she spent so much time with her granddaughter, she was also like her daughter. They're very, very close. So there's no words. And we're sitting around, anyone that came into that room and heard us laughing so much about her daughter, because she was so funny, she was so scattery, and she did some silly things. We just laughed and laughed. And someone coming in would think, oh, they're having a party. But that was our way of honouring her, but also connecting with her in our way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing so deeply and openly, Aunty Rhonda. I think there's a lot that you've shared that really resonates. And, you know, when we talk about compassionate communities, you know, like you've said, just showing up with an open heart and an open spirit. Sometimes I think, you know, in health systems and other systems, people just complicate things and, you know, being there for your people.
I just want to share one more story, just quickly about my mum when she passed. My mum, she had me when she was 16, so we had a big experience together. And she was in palliative care at home. And my sisters and I moved in with her and just did everything for her during that period of time. And that was, we did this sometime before this time in palliative care, because she's been in palliative care a couple of times. The first time she had a stroke and the doctors gave her 2 weeks to live. And so we moved in with her, and she was not at the point of eating, or so we had to feed her and do everything for her. We lived with her for 3 months. That meant for us dropping our families and just being present with mum. And mum lived 7 years, so it was after that. So the second time around, and she said to us, you know, she swore at us and said, "I'm not going to die." And we just went, you know, the doctor said this and da-da-da-da. But anyway, the second time she knew she was going to die. But what happened, and I'm, you know, holding this beautiful, loving space, but I wasn't quite there. My sisters, we started talking about mum's life and we're all very triggered. And what happened to me, I got sick and I had to go home. I had to leave her. And what happened in that time of my sickness where I couldn't get out of bed, I started meeting my mum where she was at some touch points of my trauma with my mum. And I started, you know, thinking she was only 20 something. What would her life been, you know? And so I started reflecting on what it was like in her life at that time. Anyway, I went back with her and I had the most biggest open heart. And when I went into that room, my mum knew there was no words. And we just looked at each other and our relationship had shifted. And, you know, I was able to hold authentic, true, loving space because I still had that residue of that trauma. And sometimes that can block our heart. And it's having that awareness and knowing that's the first, I think, point of healing.
Thank you, Aunty Rhonda. think, yeah, we hear it so much, sometimes of family conflict or things that have happened. And then at that time of sickness or passing, things can be really tricky for many people. And so with, your experience of what you've shared, that really, I got goosebumps. I could feel it and see it. So thank you. Genus, if we go to you, with your lived experience recently losing your mum and the ceremony and rituals that have come with that, and you've worked across many systems to address structural issues, whether it's housing, justice, or health. What sort of lessons do you see that can be drawn from their efforts to support stronger and more compassionate end of life care for our communities?
Yeah, look, I think one of the challenges um, for our First Nations community members is, when accessing mainstream health services, there's a huge gap in understanding some of those cultural protocols and practices. One of the things in my own personal journey was, um, I know there are things in place that I think need to be strengthened more, or the capacity needs to be built a lot stronger in around understanding some of these cultural practices. Because firstly, it's a very, for me in my journey, it's a very well, it's almost, well, it is a feeling of feeling unsafe in those. Let me use a hospital as an example. I've done a lot of work in, as you mentioned earlier in the introduction, around closing the gap and how do we, I guess, bring an awareness to not only GPs and local GP clinics, but across the health system. So, just to Aunty Rhonda's point, um, there's a huge gap that where there's a lack of understanding, the sensitivity around it, cultural respect, because I understand in some of those mainstream places there's a practice that needs to be followed, and there's no consideration or cultural consideration into what that looks like for somebody that identifies as Aboriginal or Torres Strait, because what might be the norm for somebody of that cultural heritage from an urban setting is way different to when there's somebody from a remote community that comes into this space. And we're talking about challenges or barriers like language, and things like that. So, there's a whole lot of learning in my experience that needs to happen in mainstream services. And, the sad part is our people, our elders are getting older, you know, so there's a huge um, um, space right now where we're losing a lot of our elders that often end up in the hospital for whatever illness or age, and then ending up in palliative care. And one of the things that I found, and my mum said this to me in her last week being on this earth, was that I was not to allow her to go into palliative care. Those words will stay with me. So when the doctor said there's nothing now we can do for your mum, and I said, well, I have to take her home, because they said the alternative is for her to go into palliative care. That was not happening. So, so you know, so you sort of, on one hand, you have the mainstream expectation, and then on the other hand, you have a cultural obligation. So where do those two worlds meet? You know, unfortunately, because of the lack of understanding from a mainstream service, they don't understand your cultural obligations. They often push against. So I was quite strong in what my intentions were, and again, being blessed working and being able to navigate in the health system, I was able to pull on a few strings to make things happen for my mum. For other family members that don't have the luxury of that or access in the way that I had access to the health, that could be very difficult. And a lot of people I've spoken to in my time, in my journey, um, they often say to me when their family members, when I say, oh, how's auntie or how's cousin going or uncle, they say, oh, there was no more beds left in the main hospital, so they put them into palliative care. So the lack of understanding about when our people get moved into palliative care begins the end of life journey. Our people in my journey, in my experience, don't fully understand that. So there's no education in that. And I'll use council as an example. We have Indigenous liaison officers. We have a unit, a cultural unit based in our hospital in council. We often don't see them. The community is screaming out, where are these people that are in this space to provide support? So, you know, we can blame this mainstream system, but we have to call out our own people as well sometimes. That, you know, that they've been placed in a position of influence, support, and sometimes it's lacking. So, and I just want to say, I'm not sitting here to have a dig at anybody. It's just that's the reality we live in. And to Aunty Rhonda's point, for my own personal journey, when my mum passed away, it was really bizarre. But after my mum passed away, we probably had 12 funerals each week after my mum passed away. And I can tell you, because of me dealing with my own trauma, as Aunty Rhonda mentioned, I could not attend any of those. I could not drag myself to a family member's funeral after the passing of my mum. And after speaking to other community people, you know, there was another gentleman who's a relative, very distant relative from the Torres Strait. He lost his mum 2 years ago. He's never attended a family member's funeral since his mum passed away. So the thing that really resonates with me and stands out is that Aunty Rhonda is 100% right. You make yourself available, but you don't smother anybody. You're there with an open heart, and people will reach out to you when they're ready for it. I've often reached out to people that have lost family members after my mum's passing and said, I'm here, I'm present, reach out when you need to. Because people will deal with trauma differently. And I suppose for me, knowing my influence in the community across many communities, it's almost an element for myself personally to try and heal, like, well, not try and heal. I don't think you will ever heal fully, but to make a stand and make yourself as a foundation or a rock. It's only my own personal journey for other people to lean in on. And I'm happy to do that. Yeah. That's something that I've placed on myself.
Yeah, thank you, Genus. I think, one of the things while both of you have been sharing so openly and generously that I've been thinking about is, and I'm familiar with, the mid-north coast, Dungari country, and the amount of compounded grief that happens. We hear too often in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities just how many people, like you've said, Genus, like 12 funerals straight, one after the other. And the ability for anyone to even begin to process that amount of grief that's so, one on top of it, one on top of the other. And so, I was wondering in your own lives, being the leaders and elders and holders of knowledge, what practices and teachings help you both stay grounded, where you can care for yourself, but you can also care for others. Because it's like, I think sitting from the sidelines and witnessing and watching some of what you've both experienced, it's enormous. And I think, inverted commas, mainstream don't always, if you're close to it, just understand just how much impact that compounded grief happens when there's funerals so regularly and you're losing people that you love or that are too young. So what helps you both?
if Aunty Rhonda's happy, I'm happy to start. That's okay. Um, Look, I think everybody can react or respond. Um, you know, we, for me personally, my personal journey was for me to care for others, I have to make sure that my cup's full. That was my approach. So, um, you know, within 3 weeks, I'll use my personal journey with my mum. It took 3 weeks for my family to bury my siblings and I and my wife and children to bury my mum and to pack her house up and finalise everything within 3 weeks. Now that was quite quick. Now I made the personal choice. I had a week off, settled. All my siblings and family went back to their homes back in Wagga and New South Wales and Canberra and all that sort of thing. I had a week off and then I was straight back into it. So I went back to work, and part of my responsibility for work was flying in and out of the city and all those things. But what I found was um, probably after 3 or 4 weeks, it actually hit me then, and I fell to pieces. But again, in my growing up, I'd always had the responsibility of being the rock family. My younger sister was born 98% blind with cataract, and my older brother was born with rheumatic heart disease. So growing up in our little family, I was always the stronger one, being the middle child. So I've carried that through my whole life. But after about 3 or 4 weeks, I think it hit me. And then all the sorry business that happened after my mum's death, it just caught up. So, um, you know, I have good friends that are counsellors, and, you know, they said, we're waiting for you to ring. When you're ready, ring up, you know, come and have a chat, all that sort of. So I think it's about sitting down in my own personal journey, sitting down, finding a clear path and sticking to the path in how do you start the healing process. Because everyone, again, like I mentioned, responds or reacts differently. And my mum and I were very close. So, as Aunty Rhonda mentioned, with her relationship. So, it took a bit of time, but, and I've shared many stories with you, Harp, over the last few months, from taking a stance. And I do want to mention this. Culturally, when my mum passed away, she had clear direction as to how she wanted to be buried. And everything my mum had asked to be put in place was the total opposite of anything culturally that we're aware of in the burial, in that process of burial. So my mum asked to be cremated, never heard of in our culture. So we cremated her. My mum wanted her urn and ashes to be buried with her parents, never heard of. So, but these were the wishes of my mum. So I think, being the headstrong kid that I was from a very young age, my mum would always remind me, I stuck to my gun. And the flack from the community and the feedback about you're doing the wrong thing, that's not how we do it culturally. So I was torn in between our culture and my mum's wishes. Now, my mum is a matriarch of culture. So you could ask her anything in the culture space, she will have an answer for you. So knowing that as my foundation, my mum being the matriarch of our culture, and she wanted to do everything total opposite of everything we believe in, that was courage, right? So it took some courage to do that. But again, as I said, I was such a headstrong kid growing up. I stuck to my guns, and in the spiritual world we live in, culturally, you know, I'm pretty sure I did the right thing, because ever since we've closed off the stuff with my mum in the last year, the blessings have continued to come in our life. not only in my life, but in my siblings' life, in my kids' life, etc., etc. So it's yeah, it's a really tough question. I think it's it's an individual journey for people. But again, I think, in my opinion, it's a whole learning. And, what might work for me mightn't work for other people. But I just know that I just put my head down, thumb up, and went hard as I could right after my mum's funeral, broke down 3 to 4 weeks later. And then I thought, okay, I've got to deal with it now.
Sorry. Thank you, Genus. I think, it is an individual journey, but, you hold a huge amount of life experience and wisdom, as does Aunty Rhonda. And so I think it's really helpful to know, well, what does help different people and what can we take from that, especially, within our own communities, when we see those people who do hold an enormous load, um, and just reminding them that, look, there's different ways to keep grounded and to keep going. Aunty Rhonda, I mean, you're right in the thick of things, at the moment, and it's not the first time. Um, and it takes courage to turn up in front of a group of people that you don't even know and share so openly, and deeply. What has helped you in the different losses you've had? You've talked deeply about healing, but even right now, with everything that you are having to hold and process, what keeps you going?
We were just talking about healing. Water does it for me. um, you know, Even when I didn't have access to the sea or the river, having a shower, I don't know, there's something about it that just it's that cleanse and cleansing my spirit. And even as a little one, I would always want baths and that all the time so I could submerge myself in water. So that is my go-to. And I think just walking barefooted on country, just helps me. Just that energy coming up through Naya, Mother Earth, sort of cleanses my spirit. I'm also in the process of organising my sister's funeral, and so it's all very fresh. 3 family members in 1 week. It's really hit us hard. But doing is something that is, at the moment I've got my sister's coffin out there, painting it, and we're putting a collage of pictures all over it because she was a private person. She didn't want a slideshow, which is the thing to do these days and that. So, but we just want to honour her journey in some way. So we thought this would be a good way to do that. She wanted to be buried. She wanted to be cremated in a cardboard box. And when it did arrive, I just was really through me, and I just river of tears. But as I painting the box, it's pink, so it's the doing, I think, and connecting with her at different times because she was my baby sister, so it's 11 years, so she was like my she was my baby for many years, and I always see her as my baby. So it was really great to sort of do that, get the pictures together, and just go through that process. It doesn't matter, like if it's hard doing that. I think it is extremely hard, but it's also healing in that. And sometimes we hold ourselves back from doing certain things or think we can't do it. But what I've learned is that we're stronger than what we think we are. So sometimes, rather than pull away, lean in, I think has helped me with staying strong, because we all need to cry. And I realise in the past I have suppressed those river of tears. and they will come up because that's what our body needs, and our body will show us that that's what we need. If you're doing too much, it'll knock you down. You rest now. That's what happens to me. So, yeah, and for me, we've got always what gives us purpose, and that is the believing in something. And I wholeheartedly believe in my ancestors, my connection to Barai, the land. And our belief is that we go to the river of the dreaming, Villa Nuraba. And when I look up in the sky, I see, all my mob up there. And it just brings so much joy to my heart. Yeah.
Thank you, Rhonda. The theme for NAIDOC Week was the next generation strength, vision, and legacy. And both you, Aunty Rhonda, and Genus are such strong, wise community elders that that are showing your young people by example, that are showing your communities by example. And, we thank you deeply for all that you are and all that you carry, and your generosity and spirit in joining us today. We can't thank you enough. Normally we're open for questions, but I think given everything that's been shared today, I'd just ask everyone to join us in thanking Aunty Rhonda and Genus for being so open, and helping all of us across the country in learning and sharing, because when we talk about compassionate communities, it is about showing up and deeply listening, and no matter where we are, walking with each other. So, Aunty Rhonda and Genus, we continue, no matter where we are in the country, to send our love to you both, and thank you deeply.
Thank you, Hap.
Thank you, everyone.
In my language, Birupai Dangari. And yeah, I'd just like to also voice gratitude for you showing up. And even though it has been a little bit of a difficult time for me, I chose to show up because in the giving you receive.
Thank you.
Thank you
And thoughts
both.
and prayers with you, Aunty Rhonda, during this time.
Yeah, yes, and thank you so much. I learned so much from you and about your mob, and I love that. I love that sharing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, have a gentle day ahead, everyone.